The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, the former White House Deputy Chief of Staff to Donald Trump joins us to discuss the behind-the-scenes drama of presidential transitions. Also, we revisit our conversation about how to raise resilient children and TVO's new series, Old Enough. That's all ahead on The Agenda. Imagine sending your 3-year-old child to the store for groceries, or your 5-year-old to grab takeout. While most parents wouldn't dream of it, TVO's new series, Old Enough, sets out to explore what happens when we let kids out into the world alone for the first time. Joining us now to discuss just how resilient kids are these days, we welcome Alex Russell, psychologist and co-author of Drop the Worry Ball, How to Parent in the Age of Entitlement. Emil Niazi, writer of the parenting column The Hard Part at The Cut. Nikki Martin, chair of early childhood studies at the University of Guelph-Humber. And two parents whose son Simon participated in Old Enough. They are David Clemmer and Stéphane Aubin. And hello, nervous parents.
Hello.
You're still around. You're doing okay.
We're doing
We
okay.
welcome the parents. We welcome the experts. And it's great to have this discussion here about this program that I don't know about all of you, but I was a bit terrified just watching it, let alone going through it. So, Stéphane, shall we start here with how terrified you were to allow participation by your young kid in this to begin with?
Oh, I think it was a mix of being terrified because I knew the city could potentially swallow him up, but also being very excited because I come from a relationship where we often have this discussion of, offering more independence and wanting to pull back. We really are the yin and yang of allowing kids to explore life on their own. So I was very excited for this challenge.
You were excited. You were petrified.
Nervous wreck.
Yes, you were.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Simon had just turned 5, sending me into a market that's so busy. My anxiety goes off. So to send him there, and of course with the crew, but I don't know the crew, and I just assume that they're going to be everyday real people, so he is not on to it.
Just explain, David, how it worked, because his task was what?
So his sister was having a birthday, so we wanted to do a birthday, and he loves to entertain. So we had to get some ingredients for Frankie's birthday.
So you sent him to the St. Lawrence Market in downtown Toronto.
Yes.
To buy
2 red snappers.
fish.
Yes,
Yeah.
2 baguettes, a ledge of cheese, or wedge of cheese for a charcuterie board,
Yeah.
and grapes, both red and green.
And Stéphane, technically he's not on his own, right? He's got a film crew
Yes.
disguised following his every move.
Well, it's a mix of feeling like a horrible parent because you're sending your kid into a very busy place on their own, but knowing that there are 8, 9 camera crew disguised, and a lot of the vendors are aware that this child will be coming in, so they're on the lookout. But the key is to really let him find out where he's going on his own. And you sit there as a parent, nervous, going through every scenario, catastrophizing, and then hoping he's actually going to say please. Is he going to be polite?
Yes.
When you told him, here's what we would like you to do,
Yeah.
was there any hesitation by him about doing this without his parents?
Oddly, no. Like to my kind of demise, I was hoping that he'd be like, no, I have to go with you. So of course work called, so I had to take the work call. And I'm like, Simon, can you at least start with this grocery list that we need? I'll meet you, or if you finish the tasks, come back out, and hopefully Daddy will be finished the
And
call.
he was gone before David could finish
He
the
was like
sentence.
skipping by. I'm like, Simon, do you know? Yes, I know. Just leave me alone.
He was fine with the whole thing. You were not.
Totally, I was not. And then
Yeah.
I was pacing, and then I was like, okay, this is an hour and a half. He's in the market. What is he doing? And PAs would come out the odd time and be like waving, and I'm like, no, don't just wave to me. How's he doing? Like, is he saying please and thank you? Does he need to use the washroom?
And,
all
well,
these parent
I
things.
just have to explain the dynamic. When we would have gone to the St. Lawrence Market as a family, it was not an enjoyable experience because David was constantly saying, where's Simon? Where's Frankie? Where's Simon? So this exact scenario without us there, seeing that unfold on TV was magical.
The show is called Old Enough. Shall we have a look at how he did?
Oh,
Sheldon, if
absolutely.
you would, let's roll the clip.
Let's have a look. Are you so tired?
Only the bread I haven't gotten back to school to get. I got the fish, I got the cheese,
Okay.
and I got the grapes. Both colors.
Okay, so you're gonna go back in?
Yeah, they get the.
What
they
kind
get
of
the
bread? What kind of bread?
The long bread.
Yeah, how many?
3.
We only need 2, but 3 is good.
No, close.
Come on, buddy.
You are so scared. It's so funny.
No,
Okay.
it isn't legit.
Alex,
Paranoia.
what can kids learn from this kind of experience?
You know, what kids learn from this is that they can do it. And so when parents believe that their child can do it, the child learns that he can do it. But conversely, when you don't give him this opportunity, your expectation is that he can't do it. And that's what he internalizes. The way you see your child is how he sees himself. And so you don't want him to see him as being capable of something he can't do.
Right.
To go down to do this all by himself without all that support wouldn't be good for a 4-year-old. But to know that he can and to believe that he can changes his sense of himself. He sees himself as competent.
Nikki, there are several episodes obviously in this series, and in some of the other episodes there are 3-year-olds being sent by themselves to go run errands, go to the dry cleaner, get the hem of Dad's pants fixed. I mean, some of the details, and a 1-inch hem, and the kid got it all right.
Yeah,
like the kid nailed it. But what do you think about the idea of a 3-year-old being sent out on errands to begin with?
I think that those 3-year-olds, I think you have to know who your child is. And I think that's a really important part. Not all 3-year-olds or even 5-year-olds will be able to do that. And I think that it's about giving challenges inside. So what I thought was really great about the show is in those 3-year-old episodes, they actually showed the children organizing the house, doing little chores. So the parents knew that the child was capable of taking on a little bit of risk or responsibility. So they weren't out in the wild on their own. And I think it's important to think about adversity, how your child manages with stress, and because we don't want to develop resilience, we don't want to give so much that they crumble. We want to give enough that they know that they can be successful. And I think the important part that we saw in all of the episodes is love. And I mean love as the science of love, as what it truly is, of having the child feel seen and heard and valued, know that they have a safe space to land, and know that they are trusted. When you know that you're trusted and you can come back and you can make mistakes and you can fail and take risks, you can do amazing things. And I think that's what we were able to see in the show that I was really impressed with, regardless of age. 3, I would be uncomfortable with.
Emile, how do you react to what you saw?
I think it's great. I have 3 kids, 6, 4, and 7 months. And one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about, just like you two, is how can I help them gain independence, gain confidence while living in a city where there are risks, there are real dangers. Car is my biggest fear. And give them the sense that they can accomplish things that are a little bit scary and a little bit hard. And it's so heartwarming and so wonderful and so funny. And I love that his instinct was to get 3 baguettes, because that is what a good host does. Of course. And it really makes me want to give my kids a lot more independence myself.
Alex, could a parent who watched these episodes be forgiven for thinking, this is nuts? There's no way a 3-year-old should be crossing busy lanes of traffic, even with a crossing guard, even with camera crews watching, on his own.
They'd be right to think it's nuts without all of that support, because you wouldn't want to just send your 3-year-old out to the dry cleaner without that support. That would be not wise, especially with a busy street. But actually, yeah, with all that support, I think lots of parents might look at that and say that's crazy. And that's part of our culture right now. We are too often underestimating children's emotional competencies. They're capable of a lot more than we're aware of. We've become helicopter parents, and part of that is underestimating what kids can actually take on. And as we're just saying, when we underestimate them, they come down to that level. What we need to do is work in what they call the proximal zone of development, to see that what's just becoming capable, they're just becoming capable of, and we operate in that zone. And so that sometimes they try and fail, but it won't be catastrophic. It might be a bit painful, but we believe in them. And when we believe them in that way, up they come each time. And we're a generation of parents who tend to do the opposite.
Yeah. Let me go back to the parents here. What do you think your son gained from this experience?
Oh my gosh, the echoes of that day we hear every single day. He has developed a sense of self and confidence from that one experience, which is kind of shocking. But he refers to that day of shopping so many times throughout his interactions with other people at school. Something as simple as our older daughter, it took her a long time to be able to walk ahead of us to go to school. Well, Simon right now, because he had that experience, he is able to go right with her, hand in hand, and he feels that we are there for him, but he is strong enough to do it on his own.
David, do you worry there is a part of him that is, because he nailed that,
Right.
overconfident, and he may not recognize dangers when he should?
Well, of course, I'm not parent, and of course I will think that. But it was really refreshing for me to actually view the episode because I wasn't in the market with him. And he is a good little independent kid that I had not seen. He was not afraid to ask for help. He was corresponding with adults, and a lot of children I find are quite shy and intimidated by these taller people. But he's not, and I'm a lot less worried. But I think he also is a smart enough kid to know his own boundaries, he's only going to test himself a little bit at a time as well. I do feel he's that kid. He's got a good head on his shoulder. And Frankie as well, even maybe just a bit more reserved. But I think they're going to tread the waters knowing that they can at least do these things now. And they can do them without us, which...
I think we also discovered that as parents, sometimes out of fear or for some reason, we shelter them from strangers' reactions to them in that moment. And watching the episode and seeing how lovely people were with this little child gave him, I'm sure, the ability to think that he can go up to anyone. You know, we say don't talk to strangers, but I personally have never met a mean stranger in my life. You know, there's a lot more friendly strangers out there. So it's encouraging the proper interaction, and just seeing him do that in the market was amazing.
David, there's a lovely moment in the show where one of the vendors is giving, I forget what it was, something, grapes or whatever, to your son. And she says, now you go take this home to your mom and dad. And he says, very matter-of-factly,
Right.
without hesitation, oh no, I've got two dads.
Yeah.
When you saw that moment on
It's
tape,
a pretty
what'd you
proud
think?
moment, I have to say. And you know, we've always been 100% honest with the kids as soon as they were old enough to kind of understand how did this work. We've been very upfront, and they're very proud of that too. You know, Father's Day in our house is a big deal. Mother's Day, well, we still go out for dinner and celebrate. There's some grandmas and a lot of aunts that they do get that holiday as well. But yeah, it's a pretty amazing experience. Almost as much for me as it was for Simon.
Yeah.
Emil, I wonder how parenting, you watch parenting, obviously, that's your thing. How's it changed from the time you were a kid to now that you're a parent?
Well, I think we are, far more aware of how we can screw up our kids. I think there's just a glut of information out there, and that information often changes. You know, you can read a book now, and then 6 months from now, 11 think pieces about how that book was completely wrong, and you've already adapted your parenting style to, you know, evolve, and then it evolves again. And I think we are very conscious about making sure we don't, you know, mess up our children. And I think that means we parent with a lot of anxiety, with a lot of fear. We want to really protect the kids rather than let them grow and evolve and understand how the world works. You know, I was thinking as we were talking how much by sort of protecting them, I'm not letting them figure out like what is dangerous and why it's dangerous, right? If I just say, you know, don't cross the street, they don't understand why if I don't allow them to actually engage with the world and pay attention to their surroundings. That's like our new thing at home.
And take on some of the anxiety.
Yes, exactly.
So he's learning to be anxious on his behalf.
Right.
So,
When
because
we
he
do the
knows what's
worrying
dangerous.
for them, they don't learn how to be adaptively anxious.
Yes, exactly. And I think when I was a kid, it was all about sort of like benign neglect, you know, they're there. It's very loving, but, you know, that's why we had latchkey kids. And that's why we had, you know, I had a house key and basically sort of like figured it out for myself. I can't imagine like letting my kids just walk home after school alone, make their own food, and then I'll be home when I'm home. But was it so bad? I mean, here we all are alive. And I think, yeah, we're just very, very conscious. And I think we parent under surveillance too, whether it's on social media. I was thinking about how the vendors sort of had to be aware, because I think these days there's just as much fear that someone will see your kid out on the street alone and then call someone, and now you are in big trouble. And I think, you know, whether it's true or not, I think we perform parenting just as much as we engage in the act of parenting as millennials and Gen Zs and parents of younger kids
Let me
today.
follow up with Nikki on that. Do you notice a significant difference in the way that, say, boomers versus millennials versus Gen Z, Gen Z, however you pronounce it, how they all parent?
Well, yeah, because life changes, right? Like life is different now. Before the internet, we had this experience of our worlds were really small and there were our communities. And so I remember walking down the street and being like, there's homes with stickers on them that I can go into and they're safe when I'm walking home. So if I feel unsafe, I can ask for help. And
They were block parents.
They were block
weren't
parents.
they?
That's
Block
what it was called.
parents.
That's right.
Yeah.
And now that we don't have that, we don't have those safe spaces. But that was one of the things I loved about watching Simon as well, was that he was confident to ask for help when he needed it. And I think that comes from an internal feeling of people are there. When we're infants and in our first 5 years, what we learn is, one of the things we learn is internal working models, is how the world works, how relationships work, how can we feel confident with people. So if I have at home experiences that I can ask for help, I can fail, I can take risks, and it's safe and I'm cared for, then I can also ask you for it, and I won't crumble inside of me because I have a strength inside of myself. I don't need somebody outside of me to take care of me. And I think that's what we're aiming for. With the internet and now social media and everything evolving over time, the world has gotten smaller, so we have this sense of everything's really scary. And my child's going to be abducted. And I'll be honest, it'll be really hard. Like, can you live with yourself if you take a risk and your child is abducted? I could never live with myself. Like, that risk feels too great for me, but it's also not real. And that's the interesting part, is that in our communities, we can see, and one of the beautiful things I loved about your episode was you could see that people were there to help. Here's a little guy walking through going, hey, where's the bread? And they're like, oh, just down there. Like, it's amazing. And I think that was a nice reminder for me of people are there to help and support. And I agree. I've never met an unhappy stranger. I've met somebody that didn't help. So I think that maybe it's an opportunity for us to rethink.
Your son did this, but your daughter is older.
Yes.
Could she have done it, or would you have wanted her to do it?
I think when they say you have to get to know the child, there is a very stark difference between Frankie and Simon in terms of their confidence level to engage with the world.
Frankie's how old?
Frankie is 8 years old.
That's your daughter, and Simon is?
Simon is 5.
5.
Yeah, he had just turned 5 at the time. Yeah. A little more apprehension there. And I feel like with Simon, had there been an experience that may have not gone well during the St. Lawrence Market extravaganza, he would have worked through that, and it would have been very easily let go. Perhaps with our older daughter, who just has a bit more anxiety, I would have been more hesitant because that might have been a little more traumatic, you know, whereas I wouldn't want a fear to develop of being on your own, you know. I'm trying to encourage her to be on her own in the world, and Simon is quite open to the idea. Perhaps because he has an older sister, to always give him that support, you know. But yeah, it's a different child.
I don't think Frankie would have left my side.
No.
In all honesty, especially with that list, or she would have, you know, purchased one thing and then quickly ran back to make sure that I'm still coming to join her. There's no question. She's definitely that. She's reserved. She's a lot more calculated. She's a thinker. So she'd be like, I know what's going on here.
Can I ask you though, David, are you're a very short leash parent, or you were anyway? You're a much more.
Yes.
Are you a longer leash parent now that you've seen what's possible?
Absolutely, I have to say.
You have changed.
And I have changed, and it took just looking in at this episode to be like, my kid's okay. He's going to be fine. And those are some nice strangers that he met.
Alex, same family, 2 different kids, 2 different experiences, 2 different levels of capabilities according to the parents.
Yeah.
How do parents decide what's age appropriate and when?
Well, I'm so glad you're paying attention to who your kids are. I mean, it's true that age and stage, there's some general truths that at 18 months, you should have baby gates at the top of the stairs for all kids, right? So there's certain there's certain benchmarks that are a bit more universal, if you like, but every child is so different, and you can hear that Frankie and Simon are very different individuals, especially when it comes to anxiety. And so, Simon's a bit more robust. And I loved your question. Are you worried now that he's like, look, Ma, no hands? and you're realizing, no, actually what happens is when kids go through this, they learn how to be, I said it earlier, adaptively anxious. It sounds like Frankie has a little bit more predisposition towards some anxiety. So he's a little bit more close to home. Yeah. And so this wouldn't have been a particularly fun exercise for her at all.
You've got 3 kids. Now, the youngest is less than a year, so perhaps this question doesn't make sense for that kid yet, but have you had discussions in your household about the relative levels of resilience you see in the 2 other kids and what they can handle, what they can't handle?
Absolutely. I mean, I see it on in small ways, like ordering at a restaurant, and we started letting them sort of choose and be the one that orders. But to Alex's point, we went traveling this summer, and our oldest son is usually the very shy, anxious, reserved one. And, up until now, we've kind of parented to that. So, very, very protective, very conscious of not having his feelings hurt or giving him too much. And we noticed over the summer, he just evolved because we did give him a longer leash. And he's just in 2 months, he's so much more confident. And then now we're parenting to that. And I think our default is our daughter is very vivacious and independent. And, kindergarten drop-off, she just started in September. She was like, see you later, couldn't care less. Whereas my son cried for, I think, an entire year.
You dropped the daughter off and you cried.
Exactly. She was just like, flicked her hair and left. But yes, knowing the kids, but seeing how much my son was able to change with a little bit of independence and confidence, it's made me think, how much more can I give them? Right. And how much more space can I give myself as a parent to meet them where they are at, as opposed to where I think that they're at.
Nikki, there's an expression, 95% of what we worry about never happens. But boy, oh boy, that 5% really terrifies us.
Really does.
How do we learn to parent without being consumed by the 5%?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question. And I struggle with this. I've struggled with this a lot myself. Not everybody comes from the same experience in life, right? We don't all have happy experiences in childhood where we have to, and then we become parents. And I think every parent wants is to make their experience of their child better than they had, right? You want to have happy, healthy children, and sometimes it's really hard to know how to get there. So it's about learning, because if you haven't experienced, it's really hard to do something you've never experienced before, right? If you've never experienced that feeling. So it's about trying, parents need to try themselves. How do I take a little bit of risk internally? How do I let go a little bit? And what happens? And I would say a watch, wait, and wonder approach, right? You make a change, watch and wait to see what happens. What does the child's reaction? And then you can give a little bit more, and you can develop this confidence within ourselves. I think sometimes we look at the child, and this is a great conversation, we think about temperament and all of these things of who the child is, but we forget about ourselves, and what parents bring to the table really makes the difference. And so being able for ourselves to grapple with our own experiences and our thoughts about, why am I doing this? What is safe? Is this mine? Is this my fear? Or is this real fear in the world? And being able to play with that internally and allow a little bit here and a little bit there, so you feel comfortable and don't overwhelm the child with like a sudden, like throw out into the woods, but allow that slow progression for both of you. It will grow beautifully, and a great relationship will form. And what I really think is important, and what all of the research says, is really, if a child feels safe, if they feel like they are trusted and are safe in the world, then they will have an idea that their world is safe, and they will be able to have great success in life.
Let me pick up on that, because parents could be excused by watching the local news every night, to think that we live in a world of complete mayhem where there are carjackings every minute of the day, there are stabbings, there are murders, there are, children being picked off the street, whatever. There is undoubtedly an emotional reaction to seeing all of that on the news. Let me ask our director, Sheldon Osman, to bring this chart up, because here are the facts. Crime rates in Canada, measured per 100,000 population, we're going to go back to 1962. This is all StatsCan data. Property crime and other crime, quote unquote, peaked in the early 90s. You see, and I guess for the people who are listening on podcasts, I'll just describe. We've got 4 lines on a graph here, and we're going across from left to right. And crime levels are fairly low in 1962. They come up and they start peaking in the 1990s. Terrible recession in the early 1990s may have had something to do with it. But then since then, the lines on the graph start going down. And even violent crime has grown relatively little since the 1960s. Now, those are empirically provable facts, but they may not deal with the underlying emotions that people feel when they watch the news. So, Emil, start us off here. If the facts suggest that we are actually not living in a Mad Max country, how do we parent accordingly?
Turn off your social media. Don't spend hours watching really scary TikToks that suggest that, if you go to Walmart, your kids will get kidnapped in the parking lot, because that's not the reality. Pay attention to what's actually happening around you and in front of you. That's what I do. We live in essentially downtown Toronto. I feel so safe. My kids feel so safe. But what I ask of them is just to pay attention to their surroundings. And I think, that's what I try and do. I try and assess what's actually going on. But when I do get lost in social media, my anxiety and my fear ratchets up. It's noticeable in myself. You have the stats to back up that it is actually much safer. But it's hard not to parent to what you feel is happening around you. But really, I just pay attention to what's actually in front of me, and that is that we live in a very safe world. This is a very safe city.
Right.
And I don't want my kids to feel they're in an unsafe world. I want them to understand what is really unsafe for them. And like I said, it's cars for the most part, So why teach them to fear an imaginary threat, kidnappings, stabbings, when the real threat is often vehicles or, not paying attention to where you're walking. And so I just really try and make them understand what's right in front of them. My kids are afraid that coyotes are going to crawl up and open the window and come inside their bedroom. You know what I mean? Like, kids are not afraid of what we think they're afraid of. It's not the boogeyman. So I think we should teach them what is actually right in front of them and what is going to make a difference in their world.
Alex, I'll follow up with you. I mean, the crime stats are what they are, considering we're currently sitting in a city, depending on what boundaries you want to look at, the GTA, 6 million people. It's relatively little crime for a city of that size, but it's not nothing.
Right.
How do you convince parents not to be overwhelmed in parenting styles depending on crime?
Another thing to think about, we're talking a lot about anxiety, aren't we? And I'm not surprised we are. We were talking about how anxious you are, and we're talking, and so the thing about anxiety is it's not a very reliable emotion. Anxiety is a combination of fear, which is an animal part of our brain, and anticipation and imagination. Anxiety is a hybrid, a tricky emotion. And as a result, it does all kinds of goofy things. For example, our anxiety systems mistake awfulness for likelihood. A couple times we've heard people mentioning child abduction because it's awful. It's astronomically remote that it would happen. But because we're so scared about it, we drive our kids everywhere, and that's actually when we kill them in car accidents. So, our anxiety systems is a really important emotion for us, but it's a tricky one. So another thing that parents really want to do is be aware of your emotions. Be aware of when you're in the grip of anxiety, because it's a little bit of madness. Just a little bit. You can hear this coyote's going to climb in our windows. That's the childhood version of it. And as adults, we're worried. It distorts our ability to really assess the situation. So all parents, all modern parents, where there's so much weight on our shoulders as parents, we feel so obligated to our kids now. It's not all bad, but we do. We're inundated with anxiety. And if you're not aware of your anxiety, you'll act out on it. If you can name it, you can tame it.
Hey, that's a good one.
Yeah,
If you can name
I didn't
it, you
make
can
that up. But you know, if you don't name it, you still might act out on it. But at least you have a fighting chance to be aware that you're in the grip of this emotion.
This was great. Thank you, everybody, for doing this. I want to say Old Enough, which is the program we've been talking about, it's available for streaming on YouTube and on the TVOkids.com website. The show's a scream. It's absolutely a scream. We've all watched it here. It's just fantastic. And, of course, if you just like watching television, as we used to call it, you can catch it on Sunday and Tuesday evenings on TVO. On the television set.
Old school.
Old school, that's right. Experts over here, two dads over here. Thanks so much for joining us here on TVO tonight. It was
Thank
great.
you.
On June 8th at the Hamilton Museum of Seaman Technology, the Canadian Society of Contemporary Iron Art got together for a public pour. We had a pretty great turnout. It was 700 people came to see it. There was a core group of members who originated the iron pour group. They started out as a dinner party and slowly worked their way towards building a furnace. The temperature of the furnace is brought up to 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit to melt the iron. The furnace was filled with many charges of iron, all collected from radiators around southern Ontario. So there were 1,500 pounds of iron that went into it, and this is a kind of continuous feeding of the furnace throughout the day. And then as the charges fill the furnace, it's tapped, and then the molten metal pours out and enters the ladle. It's very heavy. The ladle weighs about 150 pounds when it's fully filled. The role of the people in the shovel is to protect the hand and the other molds from the pouring iron. Most of the molds that were there on the day at the Sea Museum were two-part molds. The molds are made out of a resin-bonded sand that is activated by CO2 to cure the resin within the sand. Scratch blocks are also made from the same sand. But it's an open face and it allows people to same day go in and carve the surface there and produce a piece to take home with them. And so it's a lot less prep time and more accessible, good first way to have an entry point to work with iron. It's a very unique metal to be using because it is so accessible and so affordable. You can pretty much get iron anywhere. Iron is often not even accepted by like scrapyards because its value is so low. On the day of the event, when everyone comes together, you're pretty much just responding intuitively to how the metal looks, how it flows in the moment. You're looking to all these like hints within the metal, within the surface as it's melting to show you how you're going to end up responding to it. It's the surface of the metal, it's how it looks in the furnace, it's how it starts to like slowly drip out the side. These are all indications of when you're going to be coming in and ready to like tap the furnace. It's kind of a call and response between the organization of people there on the site and also a call and response with the furnace itself. This is a found frame collected with 2 river stones embedded within the center of it. And so you can see the attachment here from the gating system where the pour cup would have been outside of the sand cast. Here's where the metal fills in its molten state, and then it slowly drops down into the base here and fills out through the runners that are all these little connection points. And so it's covered in the sand, but as you work away and kind of clear it off, you end up with more of the details underneath. It's a really intuitive kind of process. Something I think about a lot is the apparent permanence of metal. It's something we think of as like rigid, unyielding, something that doesn't change much. And with this permanence, you kind of end up with its counterpart, reclaiming, reworking, melting down, tempering. All these ways that you can kind of renegotiate the material's form. It's very forgiving.
The late comedian Robin Williams once said, "Being a Canadian is like living in an apartment over a meth lab." Yes, there seems to be never a dull moment in politics with our American friends. The current president forced to stand down by his own party from contesting a second term. A black South Asian woman taking his place and having a decent shot to make history. And not one, but two assassination attempts on the life of the former president. Christopher Liddell has had a front row seat to the circus that is U.S. politics. He was White House Deputy Chief of Staff during Donald Trump's presidency and was involved in 3 presidential transition cycles, including Trump to Joe Biden. He's got a new book out. It's called Year Zero, the 5-year presidency. And he joins us now from New York City. Christopher, it's great to see you again. How you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Not at all. Let's just do a bit of background before we get to the premise of your book, which is how does a guy from New Zealand end up a high-ranking official in the Trump White House?
Well, one of the great things about the American system is that can happen. I became a citizen of the US from New Zealand about a dozen years ago, was super interested in politics over here, so volunteered for the Romney campaign, which was obviously unsuccessful, but then became involved in the Trump transition and one of the wonderful things about the American system is that you can volunteer and serve for a short period of time. You don't have to be a career politician. So I came in with a business background and was able to serve in this case for 4 years. So it's a great story and one of the great delights and achievements in my life that I was able to do it.
I suspect I do need to ask you whether working in the Trump White House was as insane and chaotic as has been portrayed.
Not at all. No. Obviously, the media likes to play up the aspects of it. But what we found inside the White House, and certainly in my role as Deputy Chief of Staff, I used to just say we were like the submarine. We just cruised along underneath the water and avoided all the storms that were above the water and got things done. And inside the White House, there was much more of a sense of calm and control, and the machine operated extremely well.
Well, we are less than 2 months away from having a new president in the United States, and then whoever wins will have, I guess, about 6 weeks to put together the most powerful and complicated government in the world. Generally speaking, how well do these transitions happen, particularly, let's say, if the party in the White House changes?
Yeah, it's a very unique system, and that's what my book is about. So in the U.S. system, as you mentioned, there's around 11 weeks between the election and inauguration. And in that 11 weeks, the president has to do an enormous amount. They have to appoint 4,000 people. They have to appoint 1,000 to 2,000 of those to have an operational government at 12:01 on January 20th. They have to get all their legislation and regulatory side of things ready to go on day one, and they have to deal with any crises. So it's just an enormous amount of work to be done in a very short period of time. And again, one of the unique things about the US system, and I lived through this, is at 11:59 on January 20th, one team's in charge. At 12:01, a whole new team is in charge, and literally the whole White House changes from 1 minute to the next. So preparing for that and doing all the work necessary to have a functioning government and probably the most important single governing unit in the world is just a vast amount of work, and that's what the book is about.
There is, though, and it's on both sides of the border, I think it's fair to say, a bit of a superstition that one never wants to count one's chickens before they hatch, and therefore any evidence that you are sort of planning to take over before you've actually won an election just is considered not wise to do. What do you think about that superstition?
Yeah, there's this concept called measuring the drapes, which, as the name suggests, is you don't want to be seen to be too presumptive, and that if anything, it will curse your chances. I actually I argue against the opposite in the book. I think, in fact, being presumptive is important, that it shows that you're ready to govern. There's no other organization in the world or other circumstance in the world where you wouldn't prepare. So if you were doing an acquisition or a merger in the financial world, in the private sector, clearly you would prepare before the day that you close. So to my mind, it's not a negative, it's actually a positive. It shows that you have the strength and knowledge and foresight to actually govern properly. So I argue to not only do more, but to also be more visible about it.
Well, in fact, I suspect the answer to this question is in the title of the book, but when would you start planning your transition to take over if, in fact, you were running for president?
Yeah, so I call the book Year Zero, which gives everyone a clue, and the subtitle is The 5-Year Presidency. And I'm not suggesting a constitutional change from our 4 years. I'm just saying that if the president wants to really have an effective 4 years in governance, they need to think of their governing period as a 5-year journey. And so to start almost a year ahead, and that sounds like a long way, but the enormous amount that needs to happen in those 11 weeks is so large that you need certainly some months and upwards of a year of planning. Now, you can short circuit some of that by looking to history, looking at books like myself, so a good $30 presidential candidates can spend to get prepared. So you can certainly cut some months off that, but you need certainly 6 and closer to 9 to 12 months to really prepare properly.
Do you think that campaigns could secure the services of the people who would have the knowledge and expertise to do this for potentially a full year before the November election? I mean, that's asking a lot of people.
It's only a small team initially, so if I give you the experience of past presidential campaigns, certainly the Romney case and the Biden case incoming that I wasn't associated with, but I observed, it starts with just 1 or 2 people, like literally myself as executive director and a chairperson. By election time, you have something closer to 500 people ready to go, and then over the election to inauguration period, closer to 1,000. So it builds exponentially over that period. You only need a small steering team over the initial period to really run it. And there's no shortage of people who want to do it. If you think of the hundreds, if not thousands, of people who work on the campaign, the transition is a relatively modest number of people working, and some of these people are paid as well. So there's a lot of people who are really enthusiastic to do it, no shortage.
Well, let me ask about another potential concern here, which is once the election has been won and you're in the midst of this transition, there is an enormous war that goes on among all the closest people to the winning candidate to get to see who, quote unquote, speaks for the president, knows the president's mind, carries the day in those meetings with the president. Doesn't that war run the risk of lasting for a year rather than 11 weeks if you start in year zero?
2 thoughts there. The first thought is that the campaign and the transition planning run quite separately. So the campaign really is in charge of winning the election. The transition planning is in charge of just planning to govern. So that helps with some of the what could otherwise be dissension. The second is, in fact, you're building partially the team that is going to be the core of when you govern. So you're ironing out some of those issues about who's really close to the president, who's important in terms of influencing opinions. So you certainly don't appoint anyone before the election, but it's a good trial run to actually see who can work well with the president, who can work together in a team environment before you have the whole spotlight of governance. So it's actually a really good period to actually iron out some of those issues as opposed to promote them.
Now, before you wrote the book, you did write an article for National Affairs, and I want to pluck a quote out of that and then put that to you. Here's you in the spring of 2023. The Trump White House suffered from high turnover in its early months, much of which was driven by incompatible personalities that sometimes made life feel more like an episode of The Sopranos than The West Wing. While task conflict, or the contesting of ideas, is vital to a team's success, personality conflict undermines it. Okay, I guess the question is, and this will sound a bit chippy, but you know, it is based in fact. If the president is determined to hire a bunch of extremist I was going to say whack jobs, but let's just call them people, who are more interested in showing off their access to the president rather than managing a policy agenda. Can you be surprised that it looks more like The Sopranos than The West Wing?
Yeah, I think one of the things that the Trump administration, certainly in a second term, very much learned from the first was the short runway they had to put together their transition team in 2016. And some of the issues that I refer to in the book that you quoted really came from a lack of really good vetting and people processes leading up to inauguration. And that led to some mistakes, and a lot of people exited in those sort of first to six to 12 months. I don't think they will make that mistake again. There is a lot of preparation going on. The president obviously has the benefit of his first term to look back on, and so he has a much better sense of who he wants in his team. And there is an inexhaustible supply of really good people. I know some of the people who are volunteering or putting their names forward in a preliminary fashion for a second Trump term, and there's actually some really good people there. So I think the president actually in this case has the benefit of the knowledge that he has from the first term and a lot better system around him to actually vet the people for the exactly the types of issues that you raised.
Having been responsible for the Trump to Biden transition, what in your life was the most difficult part of making that transition work smoothly?
Oh, really, the beginning and the end. So the beginning, because we had a situation in the first 2 or 3 weeks, which is called ascertainment, and it's a technical term that I won't go into, but basically meant that we weren't able to give the incoming Biden administration the briefings and some of the resources that they needed because of this procedural step that didn't happen for 2 or 3 weeks. So that put them back a little bit. And then at the end, obviously, we had the situation from January 6th to January 20th, where there was a lot of disruption. And so landing the plane on January 20th was challenged because of that. It actually went remarkably smoothly in the middle, given all those issues, and we've managed to form a good relationship with the Biden administration. But clearly it was one of the more challenging transitions that we've ever had.
Well, I was going to say, it surely complicates things when the guy who lost the election refuses to acknowledge that he lost the election. Fair to say?
Yeah, this too, again, there's a sort of a parallel process that happens between election and inauguration. One is the election results and the certification and any challenges of that. And the other is the transition or preparatory transition to the incoming administration. And the way we dealt with that was to really have these parallel tracks in different teams. So one team was focused on the election results. I had no dealings with that. And I was focused entirely on assuming the Biden government was confirmed as a new administration. How do we set them up for January 20th? So we ran those tracks in parallel. And to a large extent, the success of delivering things on January 20th was we kept them separate from each other.
Given how Vice President Harris got the nomination of her party, which is to say incredibly late in the campaign cycle season, is it a given that a lot of what you have been urging candidates for president to do will not have been happening, and therefore the transition, if she wins, will be really problematic? What's your view on that?
She has a relatively unique challenge, and it's interesting when you look back on the history of presidencies, you would assume there were quite a few times when a sitting vice president is elected to become president. In fact, there's only been one in the last 180 years. That was President H.W. Bush taking over from President Reagan. The one before that was that famous one that I'm sure all your viewers know, which is Martin Van Buren in 1836.
Of course.
So it doesn't happen very often. And because it doesn't happen very often, there aren't that many precedents. So your point is a good one. The benefit that she has is twofold. One, obviously she's a sitting vice president, so she knows the ropes. And she has, if she wants to, she can continue to take some of the Biden team with her. She doesn't have to have a 100% new team. So it's not like she has a 100% turnover unless she desires to. And the second thing is she actually has a very good team around her in this case. So Jeff Zients, who's the current chief of staff, ran the transition for Biden incoming. And then they brought back a chap called Johannes Abraham, who was his 2IC. So they've actually got some pretty experienced hands-on from previous transitions to help them run it.
And let me ask you the other side of the coin, which is, given that Donald Trump has been through presidential transitions before, and given as well that he is not necessarily known for his ability to take good advice from advisors, is there any reason to expect that this, if he wins, that the transition to his second term would be any better than the first?
I think this will be substantially different. Yes, all the work that I've seen behind the scenes, and I'm not directly involved, but I observe it and know some of the people who are, is actually very, very well done and very systematic. And then he appointed two very good people to be his co-chairs, Linda McMahon and Howard Lutnick, who have what is incredibly important in these transitions in terms of chair people is the trust of the candidates. So both of them are long-term confidants of his, and both have actually a very successful business career. So they're both seasoned campaigners, and Linda was a part of the cabinet in the Trump first administration. They both have solid business careers, and they're both very close to the president. So I'm actually very optimistic that they'll have one of the more organized and successful transitions ever.
But given the premise of your argument, which is that transitions should really start to be planned a year ahead of time, do you think either of the current major party tickets are adequately planning for the transition at this admittedly late stage in the game?
On the Trump side, there has been preparatory work going, in fact, for close to a couple of years. So they are actually well ahead of the game. Not all of that is public, but certainly there's been a lot of work behind the scenes going on for at least a year. So they're in very good shape. On the Harris side, obviously, because of the unique circumstances, they might be a little bit behind the game. But again, I think that's probably mitigated by their incumbency and the people they have on it.
There are very few people we've had on this program that actually know Donald Trump well, and you would certainly be one of them. So I'm going to encourage you to give whoever is the government of Canada, if Trump wins the next election, some advice. How would you urge them to deal with him if he becomes president again?
I think they've actually done a very good job so far. They've already been reaching out to the extent possible and to not only the ex-president, but the people around him, but engage early and often and in a very positive fashion. President Trump, at the end of the day, is interested in transactions and how we can work together and do things. So don't go in with a negative attitude, go in with an opportunistic attitude. This is a chance for a new president who's going to do different things. How do we take advantage of USMCA, which needs to be renegotiated? How do we take advantage of being each other's closest neighbors? And what are the ways that we can look for wins for Canada, wins for America, and put those together? And the extent that I've seen a little bit of activity already, that's very much the attitude that seems to be coming through.
Did I just hear you say you think the U.S., Mexico-Canada free trade agreement needs to be renegotiated again?
It is. There's a 5-year term where it needs to be reviewed. Renegotiated is probably, I shouldn't have said that, reviewed. So there is when it was originally drafted, there is a time frame, I believe it's June 2026, where it needs to be reviewed. So I imagine next year, 2025, people will say, how's it working? Can it be improved? Are there areas where, with 5 years of knowledge, it can be made better? So that's part of the what was envisaged when it was originally drafted.
I'm glad you clarified reviewed rather than renegotiated, because half the cabinet in Canada just had a heart attack at the thought of having to go through all that again.
Right.
Is it a given, Christopher, that you will vote for Donald Trump in November?
Well, my voting intentions obviously are my own. So you can probably guess them from my past.
Okay, and I guess the follow-up is, if someone in the Trump administration called you and said, we need you to work in the next administration if we win the election, you'll take the phone call. Would you take the job?
I'm very keen and happy to help them with the transition work, which is clearly the area that I'm really interested in, and having written a book and done a lot of study around it. So I'd certainly be available if they wanted me to help with that 75-day sprint to set up the government. Thereafterwards, I'm not sure. I'll take it one step at a time.
Okay. And final question, and that is, I don't have to tell you that the former president has said a lot of things that are really quite disgraceful, and he has, his conduct has been quite unbecoming a lot during his time in public life. You're dealing with I guess, with an audience here watching that is predominantly Canadian, and if you look at the polls in Canada, it would be something like 75-25 or 80-20 favoring the Democratic ticket versus the Republican ticket. Could you say something to our viewers and listeners which would give them, I guess, pause to reconsider what they probably think of Donald Trump, which isn't good?
Oh, well, I can point to the signing of the USMCA in his first term, which was, I think, a very beneficial trade agreement for the Canada. So if you're interested in Canada and self-interested in Canada, Donald Trump has already shown an example that he's willing to do something that's still is incredibly beneficial for Canada. So there's one simple example, which is look at the facts and look at the record.
Does his behavior trouble you ever?
Oh, look, I had a great relationship with the president, and I worked with him very well. So
interesting. Good to know, because needless to say, we don't hear much about that part of the job. I want to thank you.
Yeah, I found him an incredibly good decision maker, which is one of the areas that I really focused on inside the White House. So again, I think you have to look at his track record and what he does, and in that case, I think was very strong.
And I am happy to remind those who are working on the respective Republican and presidential campaigns that the name of your book is Year Zero, the 5-year presidency, and it has brought Christopher Liddell, the former White House Deputy Chief of Staff, to our program. Christopher, thanks so much for the time.
Thank you. Great to be on.
And that is the agenda for Tuesday, September 17th, 2024. Tomorrow on the program, a look at how cannabis has fared 6 years since its legalization. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.